What widely accepted Reddit tropes are just not true in your experience? Honestly, I think people on here think that people Ireland are ruder and worse than they are. It can be scary to be gay when all you've heard is Redditors telling you that hate crimes happen to 110% of all gay people everywhere, and you'll be murdered by every person wearing a cross necklace. Legit kept me closeted. Toxic behavior. Although I'm trans and have been hate-crimed, physically attacked by men in public while I was 100% minding my own business more than once. One time I was at a bar, and some big bald guy punched me with a closed fist in the back of my head. I never even saw him coming. The bouncer went and threw him out after the fact. I've also been groped in the crotch in broad daylight on 2 separate occasions, once at a bar and once in a busy train station, by men who wanted to check if I still had a. They didn't even ask me verbally, they just did it impulsively. My dad disowned me completely after I was caught wearing women's clothing in public, ratted out by my stepmom without her even asking me if it was okay to do so. She wanted his house, which I otherwise would have inherited, and saw the perfect opportunity to alienate him from me. She won. I lost my birthright. Been fired and bullies out of jobs too, denied jobs with the explicitly stated reason that I'm trans and would scare away the customers. Check out my profile photo to check whether I look weird or male or whatever. I don't. I look normal. Maybe some people don't get hate-crimed, but believe me that some people definitely do. I live in Belgium, a progressive trans rights country on paper. The Aida final judgment can be wrong. The one that comes to mind for me is the one where a postal worker asked if she was in whole for changing her schedule so that she and her husband, who was also a postal worker, had the same 2 days off. They already had 1 day off together, but she thought it would be nice to have 2. The thing is that her husband was someone who valued personal time and asked her if he could have 1 day to himself, so he asked her not to change the schedule. It's a complicated issue, but everyone in the thread was insisting to her that he was 100% completely guaranteed to be cheating, because according to the masses, that is the only reason a human being could want private time. And she started to buy in too, and basically said she was going to confront him about his cheating when he got home. Thing is, as someone who needs an intense amount of personal time, partially resulting from PTSD, I felt so fucking bad for her husband. He just wanted a day to himself. I would kill for a day to myself. I'm not saying it's justified to ask his wife not to change her schedule, but knowing that he was going to come home to a spouse who was convinced he was cheating because he wanted alone time made my stomach drop. And everyone was so convinced they were right. Fuck that post, it make my skin crawl. The problem with Aida is that it is mostly fueled by, let's be honest, antisocial selfish people. Some of the judgments I see on there blow my mind and wonder how people even have relationships. Drama happens in a relationship. If you listen to Aida, you would leave every single relationship for every single slight. The most recent one that came to mind was the feeding your kids uncooked chicken. It turned into outright gender warfare and had nothing to do with the question. Dude was automatically an ah because his wife did the housework. A large percentage of NTA verdicts should actually be put into your both holes bucket. Generally, people believe it's okay to fly off the handle and overreact as long as the other person was wrong first. A common example: my friend's girlfriend asked an insensitive question at dinner, so I called her a gold digger and told her to leave. It's possible to disagree with someone and stand up for what you believe without getting nasty and escalating the conflict. Specifically, a lot of parenting and long-term relationship advice can be unrealistic. Further, the sub tends to miss the target sometimes when people are in desperate situations. Yeah, it's never ideal to force a teenager to parent younger children, but when you're flat broke, one parent is terminally ill, the other parent is working 80 hours a week, and you don't have any close family or good friends nearby, what are you going to do? Parentification is wrong, but letting a toddler starve or go unsupervised isn't exactly better. And to that respect, going NC shouldn't be your first answer every time someone does a bad thing. I honestly think that some of the rising rates of loneliness and friendlessness among young adults in the Western world is that we're developing this really unfortunate cultural push to not forgive bad things people do, regardless of severity of bad thing or their regret. Sometimes, yeah, it's worth it to cut a toxic influence out of your life. But one should really stop and consider if it's worth it, or if it's better to try to reconcile or try to live with the relationship and divert the more toxic parts of it. This happens especially with ones concerning parents and children. All the high schoolers and middle schoolers on Reddit will band together and validate another child for not wanting to do very basic things. I'm not even talking about parentification or whatever. I saw one where a teen was working and contributing to the household but then got offended when his mom asked him to take out the garbage because that was her job since she's a stay-at-home mom and he already contributes to the household in his own way. Lord save me from those too well off to take out the trash they helped create. Especially when you remember that a large portion of Reddit consists of teenagers with little life experience and little sense of nuance, and that sub is no exception. The responses can be so melodramatic and jump to assuming the absolute worst. You won't let your child have cookies for dinner, your child will be traumatized, cut you off, and turn to drugs and develop an eating disorder. And you let your child have cookies for dinner, your child will be traumatized, cut you off, and turn to drugs and develop an eating disorder. I hope no actual adult seriously asked that sub for advice. Aida reminds me a lot of the politician storyline in Love Actually. Sure, as a moviegoer, we all love to see Hugh Grant stick it to the whole American president, good old Billy Bob Thornton. But if this was real life, Hugh would have to wake up the next day and have to deal with the fallout. So, sure, maybe it's fun to fantasize about it, leaving your girlfriend because she just can't get ready on time. But in real life, you're eventually going back home, right? And what then? And what the fav do you plan on telling everyone at the party that you thought it was more important to teach your girlfriend a lesson like she's a toddler than it was to wait 5 minutes? Those are decisions that you can make, but to think it doesn't color how people perceive you is fucking laughable. I'm a dad that does plenty of stuff with my kids without my wife around. I've never gotten a sideways look or rude comment for being on a playground around kids or saying hi to a child nearby. I've been a stay-at-home dad for 12 years now. It is much better now than it was then. I did get weird looks and once had a mom come and take her daughter away from where I was standing watching my son on the playground. I've been called Mr. Mom and I've heard the old "so you're babysitting today, huh?" more times than I can remember. But I don't hear those things much now and I see many more dads out with their kids compared to when I started doing this. I've even spotted a few stay-at-home dads on TV or movies. The times they are a-changing. I'm right there with you. Although I'll say one thing, I have noticed that I tend to get a lot more accolades from people for going above and beyond than my kid's mom gets for doing the same tasks that would be considered woman's work. For example, I took my daughter to an amusement park and I went to the bathroom to change her diaper. I was complimented 3 times throughout the process by strangers for changing a diaper. It's just a funny double standard I observed. I am a man and I was at the park alone last fall flying kites on a windy day half drunk and this little boy no older than 6 or 7 came up to me and asked if he could fly kites too. Hell yes, I let him fly kites with me. The whole time his mom watched and smiled. When it was time for them to go, she thanked me for being so kind to her little boy and that was that. Don't be creepy and people won't think you're creepy. But that pretty much sums up all of Reddit. Totally depends on the area, the people, and your kids. It is more common than you'd think. It just depends on your community and how many times you go out. If you do stuff with them once a week compared to a stay-at-home out with them 5 to 10 times a week. I homeschool my kids and I've been left out of homeschool group meetings because I'm not one of the moms. I've only been questioned at a park once, but I've had doctor offices call my wife, who can't answer her phone at work, instead of me, despite both of us telling them over and over to call me. I've even had CPS called because they thought I was controlling my kid's healthcare because mom is never at visits and dad demands calls go through him, and that was at a different medical system and city. Schools, doctors, group events, etc. While it isn't a universal thing and most dads will get at most comments like babysitting today, huh? It's definitely an issue when you're the primary caregiver and the one with them 90% of the time. All it takes is one time because it's memorable. My husband has remarked several times how much more friendly people are now that he's walking around with our toddler. I never know what those people are talking about. I've never seen or heard of anyone being treated that way in real life. The calling parenting babysitting when dad does it thing is totally true though, in our experience. I have commented on many of these types of comments. I have worked with children for damn near 10 years with various companies, including being directly employed by families and in various capacities. I am going to have to side with Reddit on this one. I've gotten sideways looks, stares, and backhanded comments being that I'm a guy. I've also heard stories from male colleagues about dealing with bull from the public when they're out on a field trip, for example. Is my experience everybody's experience? I doubt it, but I've experienced enough of it to know that I can't be the only one. This all fucking day long. My wife worked the weekends as a nurse, so for 12 hours a day, 2 days a week, it was just me, a big fat hairy middle-aged man, and my newborn son. I took him to the zoo pretty much every weekend since it was close to the house, and I bought one of those zoo passes that included parking. Must have went there 20 or more times that summer, and not once did anyone even talk to me, let alone comment about me babysitting or some. Probably depends on a lot of factors. I bet a biker-looking dude with tattoos all over doesn't get sighted, but the dad sitting extra far away from the playground with dark clothes and a cap on or a trench coat. Also depends on the location. Some places it might be normal, like big cities, but in rural areas it might be a whole different deal. It's simply nothing you can really see as common. You don't have to divorce your wife if she bought a $200 laptop without consulting you first. There was a comment on a post in AIDA about how big purchases need to be discussed with your spouse. The person then went on to say a big purchase was anything over $100. I replied that it really comes down to your income level and debt, because for quite a few people $100 is not a ton of money. I'm single, but if I was married, there's no way I'd be calling my wife or expect her to call me every time we were going to spend $100. I made sure to point that I agree it's different for everyone, and there could be couples who need to discuss $100 purchases, but calling that a blanket rule for everyone was just ridiculous. I was at like minus 200 within an hour. Facebook mom groups are notorious for this kind of thing. Everyone thinks people need to divorce over fights, any fights. I think people just want others to have healthy relationships, but they forget about the part where you have to work for them. Not just abandon every ill-fitting relationship until a perfect one falls into your lap. Obviously, don't take abuse, but if both parties love each other and want to be together, it just takes some work on both sides to get over a bump. And there will be plenty of bumps depending on how far each side is willing to go for the relationship. Sometimes it's uneven, but everyone has their own tolerance level. To be honest, I'd be pissed off that my fictional wife spent $200 on what is likely to be a piece of when she could have asked me what to get, and I would have recommended something more expensive, either a used or new ThinkPad, or an ARM-based MacBook, depending on her use case. For someone who thinks a $200 laptop is a good idea, it would likely be a 2 to 3-year-old used ThinkPad for $400,500. Even a 5-year-old ThinkPad has more life left in it than a brand new $200 crapbook, and it's just nicer in every way. It's just irresponsible to buy literally waste. Still wouldn't divorce said fictional wife, but on matters I likely have more knowledge in, I'd like to be consulted because there's a lot of trash out there being sold both cheap and expensive. As someone who's gotten vote ranges all over the place from relatively similar comments over the years, can absolutely confirm. About the only things I've noticed is that subs with more subscribers and thus a greater readership will tend to have a higher upper range for per comment voting because and higher voted comments are usually short, pithy, funny, and largely lacking in relevant information. It's the impulse upvote crowd that makes your 10 karma. Comment into a 10,000 karma one, and you get them by writing something that makes people laugh for a second, hit upvote, and move on. I think the problem is that once you have gotten to the point where you need advice from rondos on Reddit, things are already quite bad. Half the time people know they're going to be told do they need to break up and just need to be validated. Many of the online dating subs are populated mostly by extremely angry men who haven't yet realized Tinder is 80% men and half the women are either workers promoting thereof or bots. The dating advice subs seem populated with very immature people, incel types, and completely clueless women. Normal people doing normal dating don't usually post on those subs. I discovered the Best of Redditor Updates sub a few months ago, and I've read most of what's been posted since November. The amount of drama that gets posted, updated there is insane, and I'm so glad that I've got healthy relationships in my life. It's definitely draining to read all the negative posts on that sub, but I also can't help but be interested in what the heck is going on in these people's lives to behave like that or to be in those toxic situations, and how they deal or don't deal with them. Not only that, but a lot of times you see things like, my partner is perfect, we've been together for 4 years and everything is absolutely amazing, but he has this bad habit of leaving his socks on the ground, met with comments like, this man is a child, you need to leave ASAP, you're not his mother, and he needs to be more of an adult. Like, damn. Some stuff is valid, but the red flag breakup comments start flying in on some really minor complaints. Obviously, there are true red flags in some situations, but it feels like people only advocate for a partner who never does even the slightest thing wrong, and if they do, then you should break up and find someone else instead of just maybe talking about things first. The other day there was this post on RR Woodworking where this guy was showing off this beautiful cabin he made with a sawmill. I went to the comments in hopes he would divulge some of the various processes involved. I dream of owning my own sawmill someday to make tables and things, but it never occurred to me I could build a cabin entirely on my own. Absolutely incredible. Anyways, I was interested enough that I went through almost every comment. And towards the bottom there were people ing about how close it was to the creek and how the trees surrounding it could fall on the cabin. The dude was very poised in his responses and kept pointing out that it was built on stilts and all things in life require risk. This one was one he was willing to take considering it was a dream of his. Point being, Redditors tend to be incredibly cynical and risk-averse to a fault. On top of that, there is always an incredible number of comments from people that have no freaking clue what they are talking about. But they say these things with such confidence. The next time you come across a post involving a particular hobby of yours, just head to the comments section and you'll see what I mean. To be fair, RR Woodworking is a masterclass in commenters acting as if every possible thing that can go wrong will go wrong immediately. There was a herringbone table someone had posted there a few weeks back, and literally the top 6 comments were about how the grain pattern used was going to cause the table to warp apart and that there was no way it was going to last, and let's check back in a year and see how it looks then. They weren't just saying it could happen, they were saying it will happen. Op then replies and explaining that he had been making this exact same table design for about 5 years and was able to confirm that none of them had had any issues. The commenters aren't technically wrong. The grain could absolutely cause it to warp, but it would likely take years, not be nearly as bad as they made it out to be, and really doesn't matter in the long run. But they always reply as if anything that could possibly go wrong means the project is a complete failure. They also get all savage in the comments, trash-talking the op while acting like only the other posters are reading it. I always want to comment, I'm right here, you know. It makes me super uncomfortable how willing people are to say awful things about famous people too, seemingly assuming said person would never read Reddit comments. I would hope not, but I'm sure some people have. The pub down the street from the office I'm working at has a clapboard sign out front that says, "Home of the worst clam chowder some guy on Yelp has ever had." Same energy. I hate to say it, but the conclusion I've drawn from Reddit is that the vast majority of people not only have a danger threshold of 0, but they also think anyone who doesn't is a total idiot. I think this probably goes hand in hand with the spike in generalized anxiety we've seen in Western society, and fear voting regardless of political affiliation. I just ran into the situation you're describing when someone was asking about the risks of cave diving. Is it dangerous? Yes, of course, but only about 10 people globally die from it per year. For context, that's squarely in the range of people dying in avalanches in just my state each year. The difference is here people say, yup, it's dangerous and you should take XYZ precautions and know you're putting your life at risk, versus Reddit consistently sounds like cable news fear-mongering. Meanwhile, if American Reddit is a cross-section of the country, about 3/4 of commenters are overweight and 20 will die of heart disease, but they won't do anything about it. At least in the United States, the unfettered access to infinite information has turned us into a society of know-it-alls when it comes to avoiding exciting risks and avoiders when it comes to acting on boring risks, because to act on either one would require anything at all of our willpower. I'm a mod on R or electroplating, and this chap posted stating that he had inherited a gold wedding ring from his mother, that he was planning on proposing to his girlfriend, but she didn't like wearing gold-colored jewelry and he wanted to plate with a precious metal that was silver in color. Some arsehole decided to tell him that he shouldn't marry this lady as she was stuck up because she wouldn't wear the ring. All this guy was trying to do was something nice for his potential wife and ended up with unwanted relationship advice. I remember there was a video that hit the front page of a restaurant where the people were suspended on chairs around a hot air balloon. The comments were full of people complaining about the risk if someone had a medical emergency or dropped a knife, or other nonsense that the business would clearly have to have considered before getting up and running. You're too right about Reddit being risk-averse, but it's almost like a lot of posters get off on ting on other people's fun. If you're not talking about playing video games at home, then someone is going to complain about what you're doing. I think this is another kind of illusion, for example, characterizing Redditors as whole off of the comments. Even on a popular post, only somewhere between 1 in 20 to 1 in 100 people who view the post actually comment on it. Of course, this ratio can vary much more widely depending the sub, the post, etc. The people who are usually most likely to comment are the ones in whom the post raises strongest emotions. If you just looked at the Reddit comments, you'd arrive in a very different conclusion on the user base than if you actually polled the whole demographic. And even then, the comments that display features such as you described tend to be in the minority. The point being, it's the vocal minority distortion. I don't think Redditors in most cases are particularly risk-averse, but the people who perceive something as a risk are more likely to comment than those who aren't, so that they can share their outrage or belief of how the behavior you engage in is risky or dangerous. Post a picture of a food your kid wanted that was salty. Kid must have a salt deficiency. Get them to the doctor. Make anything for your kids, like a crib or a bed or a playset. It's going to kill your kids. Have a headache? Must be a tuma. The purpose of social media is to beg for attention and status. And being the guy that saved that poor helpless simpleton online who didn't know how close to death they were gets you both. We all know the story about the mysterious notes in the house that turned out to be a gas leak, or the person with weird red eye in a picture that turned out to be cancer. People are desperate to be the next one. A lot of this stuff, I think the cabin in particular, comes from rural-urban cultural differences. In general, it's probably more accurate to state that problem as people being overconfident that the perspective acquired through their background and experience is accurate, correct, and others are less so, but population density makes specific sense here. I think the shortcomings of rural people's understandings in regards to urban life are pretty well understood by most, but the ignorances of the other direction are overlooked in general. I grew up very rural in a tourist town. You'd get a lot of campers from bigger cities at the parks we'd play in as kids, and you can even see it when friends of college friends would visit later on. Confidence in ignorant opinions. You'd see a lot that either were convinced bears. Wolves were a constant danger if in the woods, or people that thought everything rural was somehow dumber and their superior intellect made them supermen. Watch the latter hop on a quad, insist they know exactly what they're doing, and injure themselves while almost killing someone else. I think people fall victim to believing their experiences and practices are more valid than others. If something they see is unusual and unsettling to their sensibilities, the first instinct is to rationalize it as incorrect. That you can never have friends at your job. Everybody is just waiting to stab you in the back for that next promotion or whatever. It portrays everyone besides you, the main character, as a mindless, selfish corporate drone who only thinks about themselves. I spend most of my time at work. Why wouldn't I want to get along with the people there? When I worked in the service industry, making friends with your coworkers isn't only pleasant but is a major advantage compared to someone who doesn't. Other servers, managers will be more eager to help you, and the kitchen will be far more flexible when the server is someone they like. Especially with how much of restaurant, bar culture is fake smiles and emotional performance, coworkers gravitate towards people they genuinely get along with. Even now, as a professional event photographer, making friends with my clients and other people in the music or party industry is mutually beneficial. I'm not expecting us to make friendship bracelets and go skipping in a field of daffodils, but when someone invites me to grab a drink and shoot some pool after an event, I don't mind it.